everybody. Welcome to the Apex Podcast, where we talk about everything from health and fitness to just general health. Today we have Dr. Dave Murray on with us. He's a pathologist at the Mayo Clinic here in Rochester, Minnesota. And we're going to talk about like some cellular stuff and then kind of go into some nerdy stuff that I don't understand. But Dave and I have known each other since before I opened any of my gyms. I would say, 15 years, 16 years maybe?
Yeah, it's been a long time.
So we met at church on a Wednesday night, and we just he invited us over and we kind of kicked it off. And Dave's been a mentor of mine and a friend of mine ever since. So it's an appreciation of our friendship. And then I started training him, which, helping him with his health and fitness. So what we're going to kind of do is just do an overview of what kind of made you want to get into pathology. Because before you were a pathologist, you were working at Kodak.
I was actually a research chemist at a major company, Eastman Chemical Company down in Tennessee. And then I decided, maybe there's something better to do in my life than to make paint. So that's kind of what my journey started. I was making paint, working on paint chemistry with them for a while, and then I decided, maybe there's something better to do. And I thought, what about healthcare?
What was the catalyst?
The catalyst for me was, to be honest with you, there was this incident where I was working for a major company where they asked me to go look at this technology of another company in a different state. They were thinking of buying it. I went up there, I did all this, spent all this money and all this time and all this effort into doing it for the company. And then I kind of realized it was corporate America. Their decision was already made. And I didn't feel like I was very useful in that process. So I said, I got to do something more meaningful with my life. That was it. I was kind of older at the time. I was in my 30s. I had 3 kids. I remember sitting around thinking, I made a list saying, what am I going to do here? Why should I not go retrain at this stage in life? And I said, I have retirement. I've got a nice 401k. And that's where the list ended. And I said, there's got to be more to life than this.
So what's super interesting about that is you were already on a path of success, right? So you could have retired at a normal age. Yes. You would have had plenty of money, I'm assuming, although Kodak went under. So
that was a good decision.
but not knowing that, I'm assuming you were making good money at the time, and were you?
I was making good money at the time. I was rising really quickly within my. I was kind of one of the younger management people in that position, but I realized that there's more to life than just making money, and I wanted to do something meaningful with my life. So I ended up going home and telling my wife, who to this day didn't think I was serious about actually quitting and selling all of our stuff and going back to medical school, but she found out I was very serious about it when she said yes, and so I sold my house, my cars, and I moved in with my in-laws, which was a big step, let me tell you.
With her too?
Yes.
Okay.
So that's kind of rare for you to be able to do that, especially with 3 kids, and you were in your 30s, right?
Yeah.
So you literally had everything set up. You were working. You had a good job. You had a marriage that was healthy. You had your kids. You had a house. I'm assuming you had a couple of cars. You had everything, right, that the American people would want. And you decided that you weren't fulfilled in your job, so you were like, screw it.
Yeah, let's go do something different.
That's nuts. But that's really cool to hear, and it worked out, right?
My wife always says I hate success. I like to fall on swords quite a bit. And I kind of understand that, but it really is the challenges in life that make it worth living, right? And so setting out on a new challenge to me was sort of something I had to conquer. So that was kind of the idea behind it. Okay, we're going to go do something radically different, sell everything, change things. And
so I think that Tony and I have talked about that, challenging yourself, right? Mm-hmm. So you just said it's the challenges in life. Do you think if you would have stayed in your career path that you were at, that you would have been unhappy?
Well, I hear a lot from the people who I left behind in that company, and they all tell me, you did the right thing, you did the right thing.
Okay.
But I like to tell them, it was a time when I didn't know for sure it was the right thing, when I'm in leaving all this money behind, living in a small apartment, doing all these things, being tested again, all over again, going through the training process. But now I can say I did the right thing for sure because I love my job.
Because you're on the other end of it.
Yeah, I'm on the other end.
Nice. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So you've been successful with like creating things. What would you say like the most fulfilling part of being a pathologist is?
So I kind of like, for me, my favorite days are when, for example, I just had a call from somebody outside of Mayo who has this patient who's having all these problems with their renal function and nobody really can figure out what's going on with that patient. And so they send me the testing results, I get some ideas, and then I just consented this patient to have them send the stuff here, and we start this investigation process trying to get to the root of what's really happening with this patient. So to me, that one-on-one, taking the patient, finding the cause, giving them an answer. I had one case where it was an odd case. It was a case where this lady was sweating bright orange sweat. And nobody could figure out what was wrong with
Hit
her.
by an atomic bomb?
Yeah.
What's up with that?
No, the story was she had a car accident.
Yeah.
She lost her spleen in the car accident. And after that, she was sweating bright orange. So they didn't know what to do. So I thought, oh, this is the kind of stuff I like to do. And so I thought, well, some of these patients do these for psychological reasons. I thought, well, maybe she's like eating a lot of the carotenes and all this stuff and making herself sweat orange, or she's using, the liquid suntan spray, whatever it was. So I told the lab, I told the doctor, I said, have her go out and just, exercise, get some sweat, put it on a towel and send it in. And so it came back, and sure enough, it looked pretty orange. And I took it into the lab and I said, this looks like makeup, doesn't it? And all the ladies in the lab like, no way, that's not makeup, that's not makeup. So we took that sample and we just looked for the cause. And one of the things that we did was I have access to measuring metal content and everything. And so I extracted some stuff from that towel, and we found that there was a whole lot of iron in her sweat, a lot of iron in her sweat. But nobody really documented what the iron level was. So I had some other people in the lab, including myself. We went out and worked out and sweated, and we extracted her own sweat. And she had almost 1,000 times more iron in her sweat than other people.
Was she eating just raw iron?
Well, that was the thing. Something happened in her iron metabolism after the car accident, that she was getting rid of a lot of her iron. Normally, iron is recycled in the body because you need it to build healthy red cells. And so something about her iron metabolism changed. And so then we started looking at her iron level in the blood, and it was very elevated. So at least now we had a cause. And there are ways to get rid of that iron in different ways, and I think that's what's happening for that lady.
Okay.
Those are the kind of things I like to do.
All right, so how would you say pathology connects to like everyday health concerns and exercise and nutrition?
Yeah, I like to say that pathology, the word pathos means suffering. So I study suffering, people's suffering, and so when everybody thinks of pathologist, they think of autopsy, but that's really a minor part of what we do.
Yeah.
We look at a lot of things under the microscope. So I get to see not only an autopsy, but under the microscope, I get to see the effects of disease, and which is partly nutrition, right, on the body itself. So for me, that's where the connection is made. And
so would you say you're more on like the aftermath? So like after people have screwed up for a lifetime, or like do you do anything that's like preventative?
Well, that's one of the jokes about pathologists is we know everything, we just know it too late, right? And that really comes from autopsy. But that's really just a minor role of the pathologist. So yes, I happen to run in, my primary focus is on immunology. So I spend a lot of time trying to help the doctors figure out what might be wrong with the patient's immune system. So some people are born with poor immune systems. Some people get acquired immune system problems. And so that's what I spend most of my time doing.
What would be a way for somebody to like make their immune system work better?
Well, again, as we were going to talk about all this nutritional stuff, all these things that we create in our body, they're mostly made at night while we sleep. As you're sleeping, the liver is incredibly active at making all kinds of things for you. And then there are these white blood cells that have to make all of our immune system protectants, the antibodies that we talk about, all those kind of things. So all that is really, it's a finely tuned process based on what you're eating, the resources that you're making these from, and then what comes out. So it's really important.
What do you mean by the resources?
So I mean your diet, right? Your diet. We talk about proteins, we talk about carbohydrates, and we talk about lipids, and all these things are incredibly important. Each one has a part of building you, right? Proteins, as we're going to talk about, muscles are the biggest source of proteins in your body. Lipids are incredibly important for building your cell walls, so that your cells stay intact.
So lipids are fats.
Yeah. Lipids are fat, and then the carbohydrates, which are basically sugar-based, they're the fuel. They're the fuel. So all those things are, if you don't have all those things, just like a car engine, you can have...
you can't run.
Yeah, you need the gas, you need a spark, and then you need the mechanism to make the motion go, and that's the same with your body.
And you brought up sleep. So how important is sleep? Because I've seen like people saying like, and this maybe it was like a past thing more so, but like you can sleep when you're dead. But like, sleep is really, and I know this as a trainer and whatever, sleep is when your body repairs.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
So if we're missing out on sleep, then like how is that going to affect my immune system?
So if you don't sleep, first thing we know is sleep's incredibly important for what we call the stress hormones, right? The corticosteroids. In fact, one of the ways that we test those is we always test early morning, because your body has made the most it can make by early morning while you're sleeping. So early morning testing of that kind of shows that why that sleep is important, because it's during the night when you're making all these compounds your body needs for healing and for health. So missing out on sleep kind of deprives your body, because normally when you fall asleep, you shut down a lot of other systems that are going on in your body to allow the liver to make all the things that the liver needs to make, and the immune system to make all the things that it makes, so that you can awake fresh and with...
What would be an adequate amount of sleep?
Well, the other thing that doctors do is you should listen to what we say, not what we do, but the 8 hours is actually a good goal. I think is a good goal.
Why 8 hours? Is there a reason for that, or like?
Well, there are processes. So people have mapped out like the metabolic rates of how much you're synthesizing during that time, and it really doesn't start till about after 4 hours of sleep. And then to give yourself enough time to make enough stuff, it's during that deep sleep where all that synthetic activity is going on.
Doesn't the deep sleep generally happen though in the beginning of your cycle?
Yeah, I'm not a real good sleep expert, but I know it's during the deep sleep time that you get the most synthesis going on. But I don't know where that cycle actually is.
It's interesting. So like, if I were to only get 3 hours of sleep a night,
your body's gonna be completely deprived of all the synthetic things that the liver needs to make, or it'll be short on it. And the body has ways to compensate for this, thankfully, because there are times of stress, like where you might not be able to get the sleep, the amount of sleep you want, but there are secondary processes. It's like the secondary way of doing stuff. The body has an amazing number of like compensatory, meaning if something else doesn't happen, it can do something else, like making blood cells. Like it's supposed to be done in the bone marrow, but if that doesn't work, then the liver actually can start to make blood cells, and then the spleen makes blood cells. So the body's got all this reserve, but it's like having the second team in there when you call on those
second
forces.
Strings.
Second string.
Okay. Yeah, but you want to kind of ask a little bit about muscle recovery, like,
Sure.
since we're on that.
All right.
I'm sure sleep is involved.
Yes.
Can you describe the cellular changes that occur in muscles during and after a workout?
Sure. So when you're working out, again, the first thing that needs to happen is you have to generate some energy from somewhere. And all the studies show that for muscles, the first place the body goes to is right to your bloodstream first to get the energy. And then as you keep going, then it switches to the glycogen that's actually within the muscle.
So glycogen isn't the very first thing, because that's what I've learned is.
Well, it is, but it usually uses the sugar from the bloodstream first.
But it's still glycogen.
Yeah, it's still glycogen, but
okay.
it tries to save as much, the muscle tries to save as much glycogen until the longer the workout, right? So the first stuff comes from the blood, then it goes to the muscle, and then it consumes the muscle. Then after that, then you got to go to other sources. But there's quite a bit of glycogen reserve in most people's muscles that go quite some time. Yeah.
So like a normal workout, you'd be.
Oh yeah, you're not going to consume all your glycogen at least in a normal like CrossFit kind of setting, right? Now the ultra marathon, the ultra runners, they will have to, they will end up depending on. That's why you got to stop and keep drinking the little nutrient packs, right?
Yeah.
Because eventually you're going to run out of glycogen because you're going so long that you've got to go back and pull it from whatever source you can get it.
What happens if you do run out of glycogen?
So there are ways to utilize fat. There's ways to utilize other. Again, it's the second string that calls in the second string. It's kind of like I say, if you had a house, your house usually uses natural gas and you burn all that, but you run out, then you just go out and you start cutting down wood, right? It's not what you want to do, but in an emergency situation, you do what you have to do, and that's what the body does.
The body sounds like it's pretty smart.
Yeah, the body's very smart.
Yeah, like optimized over millions of years of evolution.
Smarter than us, that's for sure.
Right.
So anyhow, as you go, there'll be natural sort of stresses that happen. Creatine is one of the other muscle sources of energy. Really, the energy comes down to this small molecule called ATP, and ATP then really is regenerated through the burning of the glycogen, or creatine also helps it quite a bit. So creatine is a very also important thing for muscle metabolism. Then after all this happens, there are some stress forces. So the way the muscles rebuild themselves is they first need to get a signal to rebuild. And there are many different signals now that scientists are learning that they can even artificially do this in a lab. But the stress produces a signal that says this muscle needs to grow. Then what needs to happen is then all the protein needs to come in. And muscle fibers, different organs in the body grow different ways. Most organs grow by dividing the cells. So if I took half your liver out, then your liver cells would multiply until you grew your liver back. Muscle cells don't do that. They tend to just get bigger, right? So it's the same cell, they just pack more fibers into each one of the cells. So they what we call hypertrophy. They get bigger. One of the nice things about muscles is they don't need to multiply like other cells in the body. They just need to grow, and that makes them a little different than other cells in the body.
So you said okay, when does the repair actually occur? So we know, but some may not, that when you're exercising, it's not actually growing muscle at that time, right? It's tearing it apart, because that's a stressor.
Yep.
So when does the actual repair start?
So 4 to 5 hours usually after the body, but mostly at night, right? So it'll start rebuilding at night.
Yeah.
That soreness that we feel after we exercise is a combination of sort of the lactic acid that built up in there, and also just
which is a waste product, right?
Yeah, it's a waste product. It's the product of, it's sort of like the smoke. You want to burn everything down as far as you can to just carbon dioxide, but sometimes it can't because of the use, and so lactic acid is sort of the smoke of the fire, so to speak.
So here's a question. I've heard people say they don't like to be sore after exercise. But if you aren't sore, would you say that you made any progress?
Not as much as when you are sore. I understand that. I don't.
I feel like if I'm not sore, I didn't do it well enough. That's just my thought on it. But it sounds like that would be true. That would hold true, right? If I didn't work hard enough, then I didn't really adopt a change, so I won't see any muscle growth.
Right. So there has to be a signal for repair that has to happen.
So your body needs to get hey, we got to fix this.
Yeah.
And then because muscles grow, it would make them bigger or stronger, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and everything, and that soreness is just a natural consequence of that. Now, of course, we know, if you overdo it, like some people, if you just go into an exercise too quick, the body can't really adapt fast enough, And that secondary mechanism that can come in can actually burn your muscle cells, right? That's that they call that rhabdomyolysis,
Yeah.
right? So that means
that's
warm up is
very
really
rare.
important. Yeah, it's really rare, but it's a process where, okay, you know, moving in like we do in CrossFit, so some stretching and other things,
Yeah.
gets the energy cycle going, and then you don't just go into it and you
Right.
know, end up burning too much muscle too
Yeah, and
quick.
as you get older, it probably takes longer to rev your body
Sure
up.
seems
and,
like it.
But okay, cool. What's the next question there, Abs?
How does a pathologist's understanding of muscle tissue contribute to our knowledge of exercise benefits and risks?
So it's really interesting to look at muscle under the microscope. There are a couple different types of muscle. Of course, we have the smooth muscle, right? The smooth muscle is all throughout the body, and it's basically there wherever you need to squeeze something, right? So your blood vessels, your ureters, anything that has to squeeze your gut is lined with smooth muscles. And if you look at those under the microscope, they're like bland pink in my world. But this like striated muscle that we're talking about here is quite amazing. It looks striated because it's very well organized. So you have these protein fibrils that are all lined up basically. And basically what happens is that in order for that muscle to contract, it needs to ratchet. This fiber needs to ratchet inside the other one. And that is all done, from what we know, is by calcium. Calcium gets in between these fibers, and then it helps it ratchet it in, right? So that's one thing that happens. So we have the protein fibers, and we need that calcium, and that calcium is actually pumped in and out of the muscle every time you do something. It's quite amazing. So your cells actually, the muscle cells have little pumps on them that'll pump calcium in and out, in and out. Then you also need the signal to pull, right? So that's also controlled by electrolytes. So it's controlled by the sodium potassium pumps, and that causes the whole muscle to pull. And if you've ever had a muscle spasm in the middle of the night, that's usually the electrolytes firing. It made your muscle just a little too sensitive. The electrolytes got a little imbalanced, and it starts pulling. The muscles are incredibly strong under those conditions. Like there are some people who have diseases where that balance is not correct, and they can actually break bones from muscle. The muscles can pull so hard it can actually break a bone.
Ouch.
So those electrolytes are incredibly important. You know, we all talk about, sometimes people talk about eating bananas when you're having cramps, and that's really to get the sodium potassium balance back to where you can kind of control that muscle contraction.
Okay.
So those are the kind of aspects. So when I think about this, so to rebuild, I need protein, but the electrolyte balance is really also important. So seeing that kind of stuff under the microscope, these contracted muscles, you can sometimes see them on autopsy. You can see like how the muscle is totally contracted and how it bunched up. So it's kind of a fascinating process to kind of see under the microscope. But I think that's kind of knowing the basic mechanism, you know, like when I'm working out, I can recognize things where the electrolytes are imbalanced. For some reason, your lips are most sensitive to your electrolytes, and I don't know if you've ever been working out and get a little tingling on your lips.
Yeah. Or your lips get dry. Or...
Yeah, but the tingling on the lips, you know, when we collect electrolytes from patients, that's usually the first thing they talk about. Like, oh, my lips are tingling. Like, oh, I better change the electrolytes a little bit.
Okay.
So if I see that, and I kind of think, oh, I better go get a electrolyte drink or something like that. Those are the kind of things that, because I've studied these things, that I can kind of see even in my own body. So it's kind of
So don't just
kind
go
of nice
get
to have that
chapstick.
knowledge. Yeah. No. I think just drinking plenty of water is also part of the electrolyte balance, right? So when I'm
But
drinking
you
water,
need to have sodium and potassium and magnesium to
Yep.
kind of level everything out.
everything out, they're all independent of each, all interdependent, meaning that there's cases where the famous cases where people use this denture cream that had zinc in it, and they got too much zinc, and that too much zinc then kept the potassium from coming in, and then they get all these potassium deficiencies. So the balanced electrolytes are really important for good health.
So like when you're exercising, you're training primarily the skeletal muscles. Can the smooth and cardiac muscles be trained, or is that something that's developed differently?
Yeah, smooth muscles are sort of I'm not totally under. Most of them are totally not under your control.
Okay.
These are things what we call the autonomic nervous system, meaning that your head is sending signals all the time. So your heart muscle is under this autonomic control, And the way the heart kind of works is there's sensors in the neck, blood pressure's in the neck. There's flow sensors in your kidney, and all these things then kind of control the heart rate. So when you start exercising, and the oxygen sensors in your neck realize, hey, we're depleting oxygen pretty quick. We need to start moving the diaphragm, get everything going, right? So all these things contribute to balancing the electrolytes. There's electrolyte detectors in your brain that kind of sense how much electrolytes are in your in your blood, and that sends signals to other organs like the kidney saying, oh, bring all the electrolytes back in, right? Bring them all back in. Very complex dance to keep all these things balanced.
So then what would you say are the key nutrients that help with muscle repair?
Well, again, the building blocks of proteins, probably number one, but we all talk about that, right? So proteins are, if I take them and break them into smaller pieces, we call those peptides. And then the last is, if I break them all the way down, they go to amino acids. And so we know that there are 26 of those, but there's a few that your body cannot make. You can only get them through the diet. So having protein in your diet is how that happens, right? So if you don't have enough protein in your diet, there's, I think, maybe 5 or 6 amino acids that your body can't make, and there's no way to make those other than getting them through the diet. So that's number one. We talked about electrolyte balance is also important in your diet, right? So making sure you're getting the right balance. And the proteins are good. Excess proteins need to be dealt with. The body doesn't really, if I eat a lot of excess proteins, unlike, the glucose, the body can store that in many different ways. And in the glycogen, there's really no storage for proteins. And so the body needs to deal with that. And proteins are the major source of nitrogen in your body. Everything else has carbon, hydrogen, oxygen in it. But proteins have a lot of nitrogen. And that nitrogen balance is something your body regulates really carefully. We talk about in medicine, if you have too much nitrogen, you can actually get confusion in your brain. So people who have liver failure, we got to limit their protein a little bit because they can't deal with it. But most people can deal with the protein in a normal way. But if you have liver failure, things like that, so that's the downside of too much protein on the other side. But if the body doesn't need it, it will just eliminate it through the urine and through the other system, the poop. Yeah.
Okay.
Not very medical term, but okay.
Well, it works for me.
And people take creatine.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about that.
That's one of my favorite stories I like to tell. I don't know if it's a funny story or a sad story, but I worked for a while. I volunteered for this organization called Lab Tests Online. And so people would write in and ask questions about their lab tests. And one day I got this note from this guy. He said, my friends are telling me I'm doing the wrong thing. He said, I know our muscles need creatine to build. And he said, and I know there's a lot of creatine in urine. And so I've been drinking my own urine.
Oh, gosh.
Well, the difference is the breakdown product is creatinine, not creatine. There's there's 2-letter difference in there, IN. And I thought for that guy, that made a big difference. So understanding what you're actually doing, not just going with the buzzword. So yeah, it's one of my favorites.
So taking creatine does actually help.
Yeah, creatine, not creatinine.
Yeah. Okay.
So like supplement companies, they sell different things like BCAAs or EAAs. Like do they have different effects on the recovery based on?
Yeah. Now what you got to
do they
watch
work,
out
I guess,
in the supplement world is the way that the companies judge how much protein's in a supplement is looking at the nitrogen content. So some of these fly-by-night companies, what they do is they put small nitrogen compounds in there to artificially boost the so-called protein content of their drink. So things like, this is how melamine got in baby milk, people trying to cheat the system. So yeah, using a reputable source is pretty important because people will try to cheat the system.
Okay. So like third-party tested is probably what you want.
Yeah, you probably want, you want somebody who's pretty reputable,
Yeah.
Okay.
Cheap isn't always cheap, right? Sometimes I've heard nothing more expensive than cheap because sometimes it can
it right
do
out.
some damage.
What would like some common misconceptions be about like diet and exercise and like the pathology realm?
Well, I don't know. I think, we go through stages. We vilify, sometimes we tend to vilify certain things. And there was an interesting display by a nutritionist at Mayo who kind of went through the diet fads through the years, and then we circulate, oh, carbohydrates are bad, oh, lipids are bad, oh, proteins are bad.
Yep.
I think going to any extreme on any one of those is kind of something you need to be, like, they're all important.
Right. So balance.
Yeah, and understanding the balance, understanding how they're used, some of the ups and downs of everything. I think that's really kind of important to make sure you're not going totally to one extreme or another extreme. I also I have a heavy metals testing lab, and I know that there was this fad of eating lots of tuna, but tuna has a little bit. I don't know, it was some diet fad of eating tuna. And unfortunately, the tuna in our world has a lot of mercury in it, and I've actually had cases of mercury poisoning from eating too much of one thing. So I think those are some of the traps you can fall into. Or I had another guy that, silver is considered an antibiotic, right? So you can actually use silver.
Is?
Huh? Yeah, so, in the days when chlamydia, they would put silver drops into the eyes of babies when they were born to kill the bacteria. But then I had a guy drink colloidal silica, and he turned colloidal silver, and he turned actually blue. His skin turned blue. He looked just like a Smurf. So people, you need to be careful of some of these things. These things are, I think the extremes is where you got to try to avoid getting into the extremes of one versus another.
Yeah, I always tell people like certain diets aren't good or bad. It just maybe there's a time for one specific diet over another one, or like your body might, and that can be a pathology thing too. Like, everyone's body operates slightly different? So like, could one person's body respond differently to a diet than another person's body?
Absolutely. We push for this, what we call individualized medicine, because even though, we all have the same enzymes, some enzymes work better in some people and some not.
Yeah.
Enzymes actually can be developed over time. I had a friend in medical school. She grew up in a vegan home. And then when she tried to eat meat, she just couldn't because the enzymes weren't developed anymore.
Okay.
So for different people, different things will work. And I think, an individualized plan. But, that's why your organization exists, right? Because everybody's different. If we all could do one thing, then the other thing, some of these new fads and some of the drugs that are coming on the market, I know that there are some drugs that have looked at the muscle signaling pathway, and they've made some artificial drugs, and I've seen some pretty buff mice, pictures of pretty buff mice that were totally done artificially. I tend to stay away from those until they're really well proven.
How long would you say it takes for a medication to be safe to use?
Wow.
Because some of the ones that we have been on the shelf for 50 years, right? And they still use the same ones.
Yeah, and it's kind of amazing that, there's also cases where we've used the same drug for 10 years and didn't find out the side effect. Took 10 years to figure out the side effect, right? Because even though it's rare, you start to build it up over time. So I'm probably not like most doctors. That's probably why I went into pathology. I don't like a lot of the way we do modern medicine with drugs, but that's my preference, right? I think we overprescribe pills to fix problems, and then we create problems.
And then we have to prescribe more pills to fix those problems.
So that's kind of why I wouldn't have made a good internal medicine doctor, because I didn't really like that way we were doing medicine. So that's why pathology suited me a little better.
Yeah.
So then how would you use your insights to tailor exercise and diet plans for better health outcomes? So we talked about individualized medicine, right? So would you recommend genetic testing to say which enzymes are more active, and then you can prescribe certain nutrition plans?
That's a good question. That one of the reasons I like working out at CrossFit, it's because I remember Dave was able to tailor a lot of things for me. He even kept me working one time when I had a broken leg. And I thought I could get out of exercise, but no such luck. He tailored. So tailoring those things. Now, I don't know about the genetic testing part. We do some of that for drug metabolism. There are certain drugs that are metabolized by different enzymes differently. I don't know how well the science is developed for like doing this for nutrition yet at this point. I'm not really up on that part though. So, but I do think sitting down with somebody outside of you, because accountability is really kind of the important part for me, at least for the for the nutrition. And then having a goal in mind, like what is the goal that you want to reach? And that's why I like, I remember you asking, what's your goal? Ask me, what's your goal? Like, is it to lose weight? What do you really want to do? You want to feel healthy? You want to get stronger? What is it that you want? And then you can tailor your diet to that. But
so it'd be the same with medicine, right? Like, what is your ultimate goal?
Yeah.
And then tailor that to finding the right path.
Yeah, I feel like that's sort of what I do as a in a physician. I make recommendations to people, but it's up to them to decide what they really want. I don't feel like I need to push my recommendations on them, but that's the way I kind of view it. And I think diet has some of that same kind of thing. But there are definitely basics, right? Like, starving yourself and those kind of things, fasting. They have temporary benefit, but everything taken too far can lead to problems. So.
Yeah. So taking one thing out of your diet for too long is probably a bad thing.
And I like to tell this story. It's one of the stories that impacted me. There was this book written by C.S. Lewis. It was called The Screw Tape Letters. And in this book, it was a fictitious book about these demons, and all they were doing was trying to trap people into different vices, right? So that was the idea. And they talk about this one guy, the head demon, his name is Wormwood, and then this junior demon was talking about this man he was trying to trap. But he lost this man to the demon world, and the senior demon said, well, what happened? He said, what the guy started doing, he started reading books and going for a nice walk and exercising, right? And he told him, well, what you really should have done was to trap him, you should have convinced him that he needed knowledge and that he had to do exercise in order to make, his life extremely better, not for the pleasure of just doing those kind of things. And I think that that's a good advice for all of us. I think about that often. Like, I want to use the diet, and I want it to make my life better, but I don't want to be a slave to the diet, right? I don't want to be a slave to anything. And so that's the trap that I think you can fall into when you do these kind of things. Like, I don't want to become a slave to that which I'm really enjoying. And so, like, one of the practices I use, even when I come to CrossFit, is somewhere along the line, I try to remind myself, like, I'm thankful I can do this today. Even though it's tough, I'm thankful I can get in here and lift this weight, or even though I might be failing, then I don't become a slave to that. I'm not exercising to improve myself. I'm exercising because of the joy of how it feels to exercise, right? And I think diets are the same way, that eventually the diet will feel good to you, right? As you start to feel better and wait it out. But if you're trapped in the process of like trying to keep track of every little thing, it can sometimes become a burden instead of a pleasure.
So like across time, like we often find villains, right, in our health. Like for a while, it was like fats are the villain. Like we should stay away from fats, and it became carbohydrates, and it became like CrossFit for like.
Yeah.
So then, what would you say? Like are all of those stories somewhat correct, or is the truth somewhere in the middle? Or
Well, I'm sure anything in excess is the villain, right? That is true. That if I had a diet of only lipids, I wouldn't probably last too long, right? That's what happens to the diabetic. Yeah. The diabetic cannot use their sugar for fuel, right? Because they don't have the insulin to pull it into the cell to use it as a fuel. Then the body starts burning down the lipids. That's what it does. And then this is what we call DKA in medicine, diabetic ketoacidosis. Yep. And I just remember one time when someone was giving like the Atkins diet, they said, well, one of the ways you should know you're doing well is you can find those ketones in your urine. I thought, well, okay, that's a little extreme. That means you really are burning down the fats of your body, and that's what we talked about earlier. That's a secondary mechanism.
Right.
That's intended for emergency use only. Yeah, it's like pulling the fire alarm when everything's going on. So
Yeah, so those secondary mechanisms, they're not necessarily good to use for a long period of time,
Right.
or okay.
well, yeah, they're there for emergency use. Like
Okay.
you don't want to.
What if
use
you
the-
continue
You don't want to
to
use the parachute until you need it, right?
What if you continue to use them?
Well, that's probably, I think, some of the reasons why they're not sustainable.
Okay.
Because you use them to get what you want, and then when you go back to eating normal, then the body's like, okay, let's go back to normal. It's much better to train your body under the
Okay.
normal conditions, I think, than to train it under emergency conditions.
Okay.
Like your emergency conditions, it's sort of like the COVID lockdown. That was good for a little bit, right? But we certainly didn't want to live there forever, right?
Right.
So it was important for a season, and then you go back to living your normal life.
Yeah. All right, we're gonna start to wrap things up a little bit. So if you could what are the most important takeaways for listeners to remember with pathology, exercise, and nutrition?
Well, I think first thing I want to say is pathologists aren't just deal with dead people.
Okay.
I hear that all
I
the
didn't
time.
think that, but
Well, I hear that all the time. Oh, you're a pathologist. You like dead people, huh? Like, no, I like living people a lot more than dead people. And so I think for me, as I reflect about what we talked about today, I think getting this basic understanding of how your body functions is really kind of an important for you. One, to motivate yourself to do things like exercise and things like that. I'm not really a sporty guy at all. Like I don't exercise because I'm into the competition, but I know how important it is for my health.
right.
And I think if the people listening to this, if you can kind of educate yourself on some of these basic principles, you'll find yourself much more motivated and understanding of why you need to do it. I mean,
Yeah.
that's-
So sleep, exercise, a rounded diet.
Yeah.
Not this one diet.
Yes, rounded diets, realizing that this is good for your health. That's the same way with, medicine compliance for patients. The more you educate them on what the benefits are, the more
Yeah.
likely they will be able to take the medicine.
Okay.
If you don't tell them, they're like, well, okay, I'm not going to take this medicine because I don't believe you, right? So educating yourself, and that way you'll build your own convictions on your health, and then you'll more likely to carry them out.
And probably more likely to stick with them, right?
Yeah.
Well, hopefully.
Yeah, the goal and the long-term goal, I mean, it's up to you, but for me, it's like the days I don't work out at CrossFit, I go home, I feel the anxiety of my body not processing everything that needed to be processed. I can tell you that if I work out, I sleep better, everything gets better for me when I do these kind of things. So, and I realize why that is, because that's the way the body was really designed to function. So you want to run the car.
Yeah, we were designed to move, right?
Yeah, we were
Not
designed to
just
move.
sit in place all day.
No, yeah. And unfortunately, many of our jobs today, we have to sit in place, including me being a pathologist. So that's why it's even more important for me, because I sit all day and look at things under the microscope. So.
Right. And I mean, in general, not one type of exercise is better than another, but I think as we were talking about, a well-rounded exercise plan is important. So not just all cardiovascular work, but we want to have some cardiovascular, some weight training. We should probably think about stretching once in a while. All that stuff goes into a healthy exercise plan. Just like a rounded diet wouldn't just be all meat. And then sleep, we want to get, you said it, 8 hours.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. You need that time to heal.
yep. And then I guess some of it's mind stuff, right? We need to take a mind break once in a while, or we need to build our mind up.
Yeah.
So
And to find joy in the journey, so to speak, right? That's also very important.
yeah. So you were saying, we want stressors, right? Which is part of the reason that
Yeah.
you didn't want to be stuck in one job that was boring for your whole life, right? You wanted to find something that would give you joy.
Yep.
So you stressed everyone out in your whole house and did.
I did.
Do you guys have anything else?
I don't.
No, I think we covered all the bases. So it's
Thanks
great.
Right.
for coming.
So
Appreciate your time and
Sure, it was fun.
Yeah, so we appreciate everyone for watching this. Please like and subscribe on the Apex station here, and we will see you guys next week.